The laughter of champagne glasses and the hum of violins floated through the salty air like a dream I hadn't realized I was still inside. My heels sunk slightly into the manicured grass of the coastal estate. There were strings of lights wrapped around palm trees, white roses floating in crystal vases, and a band that probably cost more than the first house I ever rented. The view behind the ceremony arch was an endless blue, sky melting into ocean, waves whispering secrets to the sand. I stood in the middle of it all wearing a dress that didn't feel real on my body, hand in hand with a man whose last name had built empires. I could hear guests clapping, some crying. My cheeks hurt from smiling, but it wasn't fake. I was happy. Or maybe I just wanted to believe I was. Once upon a time, I folded laundry in the back of a gas station, dreaming about a day like this. I used to imagine lace veils and cake tastings between graveyard shifts and bills that never stopped piling up. That girl, she wouldn't recognize me now. She wouldn't believe that the youngest of three, always forgotten, could end up in a fairy tale. But even fairy tales come with warnings. I caught a glimpse, just a flicker, of movement near the champagne fountain. A tall woman in black, not on the guest list, standing too still. Something about her posture made my skin tighten. Then, the music slowed, and I knew. Fallon had arrived. She wore black. Not funeral black, not modest black. Designer, sharp shoulders, expensive silk, like she came straight from the cover of a courtroom scandal. Mid-50s, still holding on to her youth with injections and entitlement. The moment she stepped onto the lawn, the crowd parted like she had Moses in her bloodline. Gasps and glances followed her like perfume. My body stiffened. My hands, ice. She walked straight to my husband, gave him a hug that lingered a little too long, then turned to me with a smile that could slice through drywall. "Congratulations," she said sweetly, her voice smooth and theatrical. "You look almost like your mother." Fake compliment, real venom. That was Fallon in one sentence. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Not because I was scared. God, no. But because I knew. This wasn't a family visit. This was a performance. Fallon never showed up without a reason. "Can we speak privately?" she said, tilting her head like she had manners. I stayed still. "It's my wedding." She smiled wider. "Then let's make it memorable." Her voice lifted, loud enough to reach the canapé's table. "I'm here to settle a $150 million debt," she announced, "for 12 years of abandonment." The air snapped. People turned. Phones came out. A few audible gasps rippled like a wave through the crowd. I felt the blood drain from my face, but my spine stayed straight. In my head, I heard my therapist's voice. "You don't owe anyone your peace." Fallon continued, now fully owning the stage like it was her damn Broadway debut. "I raised you after your father died. You vanished. And now you marry into a fortune. Seems like a good time to collect." My husband looked at me, eyes wide. His hand reached for mine. I didn't take it. "She sold my piano," I whispered, more to myself than anyone. I was 12. She needed Vegas money. He blinked. "What?" I took a breath. "She blamed me for his death, and now she's playing victim in front of my guests." A photographer kept snapping photos. My in-laws stood frozen, whispering. My husband's business partner leaned into him, worried. PR. Reputation. Headlines. I stepped back. Fallon smirked. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Guilt catching up?" I turned and walked toward the veranda. I couldn't give her more stage time, not with everyone watching like it was a Netflix documentary in real time. Outside, the night air hit my face like a wake-up slap. I stood under the string lights, bouquet clutched like a weapon. My knuckles were white. I remembered that last day, she had promised not to sell anything sentimental. I came home from school, and the piano was gone. She was halfway to Vegas. "She'll destroy you," I whispered to no one, "unless you refuse to let her." A few guests followed outside, whispering. Phones still recording. One woman said, "Isn't that the lady who filed for bankruptcy?" Another, "Wasn't she investigated for wire fraud?" I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them post. I wasn't going to let this become my shame. Not today. I turned, ready to face the chaos again. And that's when a woman stepped into my path. Mid-30s, blazer, calm eyes. She held out a card. I took it. FBI, Financial Crimes Division. Her voice was low, controlled. "You're not the one we're investigating," she said, "but you're the key." And just like that, my wedding day became evidence. I stared at that envelope like it held both my future and my past. My fingers trembled just enough that I had to tuck them into my dress to hide it. I needed to think, but the noise outside that lounge door was growing louder. Fallon was still somewhere out there, soaking in the spotlight like it was a warm bath. I turned to the agent and said, "I need 5 minutes." She nodded and stepped out without a word. I closed the door, turned the lock, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The room smelled like roses and champagne, but all I could sense was smoke. Smoke from a fire. Fallon lit the second she walked through those gates. I found her in a side corridor, flanked by two curious guests. She seemed to be charming like a snake in silk. "We need to talk. Alone," I said through clenched teeth. Fallon didn't flinch. She tilted her head and offered a smug little nod. "Finally." "I thought you'd never grow a spine." We walked in silence to a lounge near the east wing, far enough from the chaos, but not so far that I could forget what she'd already done. Inside, the room was still pristine. Wrapped gifts lined one wall. A silver bucket of champagne sat unopened beside a couch that cost more than my first car. It should have felt luxurious. It didn't. Fallon sat first, like it was her house. "You left me no choice. You ignored me for 12 years. I stayed standing. She crossed her legs and smoothed her dress like she was auditioning for an awards show. "Your father's death left me with everything to manage. The estate, the debts, the rumors. And where were you? Gone. Vanished. You owe me." "Owe you?" I repeated, quieter than I intended. "Yes," she said, pulling a thick folder from her purse. "Emotionally, financially, you abandoned your family. You slandered me. You blocked me out of what was rightfully mine." I didn't even look at the folder yet. My mind was too busy with the memory. Me, 17, begging at her locked front door to see my father one last time. And her, behind the blinds, pretending I wasn't there. "You didn't even let me say goodbye," I whispered. She shrugged. "You always made everything so dramatic." My hands curled into fists at my sides. I stayed calm, but something inside me cracked. This wasn't just bitterness. This was calculation. Fallon stood again and held out the folder. "Read it. Then tell me who the real villain is." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were pages, typed, notarized, thick with legal jargon. Claim for damages. Emotional distress. Neglect. Breach of familial duty. One section demanded restitution for financial hardships incurred while managing family assets on behalf of a minor. Another claimed slander by omission, essentially saying that by not speaking to her publicly, I had implied guilt on her part. She was suing me, and my husband, for $150 million. She didn't raise me, I thought. She erased me. Fallon smirked like she could hear my thoughts. "You married money. Now you'll pay for forgetting where you came from." I closed the folder. "You're not getting a dime," I said. Her smile didn't waver. "We'll see." I walked out before I could throw the champagne bucket at her. By the time I returned to the main reception, the party was unraveling. Guests were clustered in groups, whispering. Phones were still out. My husband's mother, Vivian, stood near the cake table with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You never mentioned you had that in your background," she said, like I was a dirty secret she had to bleach out of the family tree. I didn't respond. One of the guests nudged her friend and pointed at a phone screen. I glanced over. A video clip. Fallon hugging my husband. A caption beneath it. "New wife, old family drama?" My stomach churned. Somewhere near the entrance, I saw my in-laws huddled together. The body language said it all. Damage control, whispered blame. I wasn't just embarrassing, I was inconvenient. She didn't just humiliate me, I thought. She contaminated my name. I stepped away, unsure where I was going, only knowing I needed air, but the FBI agent beat me to the hallway. "We've been watching her for months," she said. "Charity fraud, tax manipulation, real estate scams, this wedding stunt, it's classic distraction." She handed me another envelope, this one smaller, sealed. "What's this?" "A subpoena," she said. "You're not a suspect. You're a critical witness." I stared at it. Fallon wasn't just a parasite. She might be a criminal. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, folded the envelope into my clutch, and walked away. Back in the honeymoon suite, everything was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my gown, veil tossed on the floor. I opened the envelope. The paper inside felt heavier than it should have. There was a knock at the door. My husband. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer. She walked into my wedding with a smile. She may leave it in handcuffs. But at what cost to me? The headlines were already eating their way across every screen in my apartment before I stepped through the door. The glare of my phone's glow, the buzz of alerts. Scandal in Charleston wedding. Stepmom's claim. Bride accused of silence. They felt like echoes of a vitriol tuned just for me. I shut the door and exhaled so hard my lungs felt hollow. My husband, Cole, stood by the kitchen island, arms folded. He looks at me with something between worry and guilt. He asked gently, "Did you see what tabloids said?" "Yes," I said. "They make me sound like I plotted this." Cole's eyes flicked away. "Maybe you underestimated how much damage those lies could do." My face burned. Not from shame, but fury. Not because I had to defend myself, but because people believed what they wanted to believe. Vivian, my mother-in-law, sent a text that afternoon. "Lay low, for the sake of family dignity." Family dignity. Words that tasted bitter, because what was dignity if your name was dragged through mud? I spent the night replaying Fallon's words over and over. How she painted me absent, how she claimed ownership over grief and duty. After dinner, which we mostly ignored, I retreated to our penthouse living room. The view of Chicago's skyline was sharp and mocking. I held a wine glass, no wine, just ice and water. But for seconds, I let the cold burn me more than any flame. Then I remembered the old box. Wedding gifts were piled upstairs. I asked Cole to help me move a stack of unopened bouquets and envelopes. Beneath them was a dusty chest labeled "From Dad's house." My heart jolted. I hadn't known that chest came here, or when it was moved. Inside, a leather-bound journal, brittle with age. My father's handwriting, pages of late-night worry, references to trusts, whispers about Fallon, doubts he confided to the page. She tells me I should cut off Harlan. Says he'll drain me emotionally. Tears threatened, but I caught them. This was not guesswork anymore. This was his voice, loud and present. That evening, Marcia Tellings, our family's old lawyer, someone who smelled of old law books and bristled when injustice was mentioned, emailed me. She asked to meet at a quiet cafe. I sat across from her, stirring tea I barely tasted. She leaned in. "I can't take your case," she said softly. "But I've seen enough. Fallon used this on someone else. She planted narratives, stretched truths. He settled. No courtroom. Just hush money, broken promises." A knot formed in my chest. I felt both relief and fear. If Fallon had done this before, and won, what chance do I have now? But beneath that fear, a spark. If I could gather proof, my father's journal, the original documents, witnesses, I could build something they couldn't just erase. Back home, Cole was reviewing legal emails. I slid the journal across the table. "This," I said, voice steady, "is one of the proofs. I want you to read this." He touched the journal lightly, then paused. "This complicates things," he said, his voice exhausted. I wanted to punch something, but I swallowed it, because I knew anger alone wouldn't win. Evidence would. Alone, I wandered the living room, journal open, reading passages where Dad doubted Fallon's loyalty, where he predicted precisely this moment, where silence would become her power. Sitting on the couch, I traced letters in his handwriting. words I read in the dark when I thought no one was looking. Later, unable to sleep, I curled on the couch, the journal clasped to my chest, staring at the ceiling. The skyline's lights, blurred through my tears, looked like stars I could never reach. My phone buzzed. Restricted number. My heart sank. A voice, cold and distorted, said, "If you don't drop the journal, we'll drop you." Silence hung. Then I whispered to the empty room, "They've underestimated how far I'll go." The moment I stepped into my father's old study, it was like the air itself had memory. The door creaked the same way it did when I was a child sneaking in to watch him work. The scent of aged paper, faint cigar smoke, and leather still lingered, untouched by time or grief. I carried two things with me: his journal and the weathered leather box I had found tucked away like a confession. I set them gently on his desk, the same desk where he once signed birthday cards and trust documents. My fingers skimmed over the wood grain. That desk saw more truth than any of us ever spoke aloud. I caught a glimpse of a photo I'd walked past 1,000 times without noticing. My father sat in the center. I was maybe 8, perched beside him, my face open, beaming. Fallon stood just behind, smiling, but flat, like she practiced it in a mirror. For the first time, I saw the picture for what it was, a performance she had rehearsed far longer than I realized. I wasn't here to mourn anymore. I was here to make sense of what he left behind and what they tried to bury with him. I turned the combination on his safe, the numbers coming back to me like muscle memory. Inside were documents, trusts, estate outlines, and one crisp envelope marked with my initials. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a contract. My name listed clearly as heir to the primary family trust. But something was off. The signature date had been altered, just slightly, the font too modern, legal clauses added in a different ink, the handwriting in the margins. It wasn't his. It was Fallon's. I recognized it from years of birthday cards she made me sign for him. Loopy R's, long Y tails. Her legalese now peppered through a document that once protected me. She rewrote his will. No, not rewrote. Warped it. Bent it to her gain. I took photos of everything. Every smudge, every corner fold, every signature. A voice echoed in my head, my friend Linda, years ago. They can't rewrite the past if you show every page. My heart pounded with a different kind of grief, anger soaked in disbelief. I pulled open another drawer, a smaller one my father always locked. The key was hidden under the desk mat. Inside lay his silver locket, worn smooth on the edges but heavy in my palm. I popped it open. One side, a photo of my mother, smiling with wind-blown hair. The other, a scrap of paper tucked inside with trembling script. One day they will see. I stared at it, breath caught in my throat. It matched the words on the linen box. My father had left me a message, quiet, buried in keepsakes, but clear. He saw the rot growing beneath the polished surface. On the back of the locket, an engraving I had misunderstood all my life. AV. I used to think it was a couple's message. But no, it was Avis to Harlan, from his mother to him. A reminder of who raised him when legacy and blood didn't align. A bond passed down. One Fallon couldn't erase. I clutched the locket to my chest, every nerve sharp with clarity. He didn't forget me. He feared what she'd do when he no longer could protect me. And now she had tried to erase me from his story, but not anymore. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened a video call. Fallon's face appeared, polished and cold. I held up the contract, the photos, the locket. She didn't flinch. That document was interpreted legally, by attorneys. Don't embarrass yourself. I didn't blink. How do you sleep at night knowing you rewrote a dying man's last words? Her smile chilled me. If he really meant it, he would have kept it locked up tighter. It wasn't just arrogance. It was certainty. She believed the law would protect her lies. I ended the call without another word. She wasn't going to give me anything, but she just gave me enough. I called a forensic document analyst first thing the next morning. Then I drafted a legal notice. And that night, As the house settled into quiet, I sat with my tea and the locket on my lap, phone lighting up with a message from an unknown number. You are not authorized to view or publish those documents. If you proceed, there will be consequences. I stared at the words, felt the heat rise in my chest. Then I pressed record on my phone and began to speak. Tonight, silence no longer protects anyone. I arrived at Rebecca Lynn's law office just after 8 a.m., sunlight spilling through tall windows onto a long glass table. I carried the leather-bound journal, the contract with altered dates, and the locket, my father's keepsake. Rebecca stood by the door, sharp suit, sharper mind. She gave me a nod that felt like permission to breathe. I laid the documents out. She leaned over the contract first, reading my father's handwriting, the edits in Fallon's setup, the signature dates that didn't match earlier drafts. Rebecca's eyes flicked from my face to the paper. You don't just have circumstantial emotion, you have legal leverage, she said. I said nothing. I watched her analyze every line. She explained chain of custody, digital backups, how evidence can be tainted if emails or photos have unclear origins. I asked if we could set traps, leave Fallon thinking she still controlled something. She agreed. She told me we'd need to record permissions, timestamps, witness statements. I nodded, heart thudding. This was no longer just a hurt. It was strategy. Later that morning, I walked into a waiting room, hands empty except for my phone. Someone recognized me, once worked for Fallon managing her finances. He slid a USB drive across the table quietly. She buried files under charities, he said. I kept versions. He vanished before I could ask more. I plugged the drive into Rebecca's laptop. Inside, folders with transactions that didn't match public records, payments to offshore accounts. Rebecca looked up. This is criminal, she said. It's beyond reputation now. Back home, the city hum would usually soothe me, but today it pressed like guilt. Cole was at his desk, reviewing PR scripts. He'd been quiet. I slid the locket out and dropped the journal next to him. I found something, I said softly. He didn't look up at first. They want a truce. Fallon offered silence in exchange for peace. My voice cracked. She blackmails me and gets to negotiate peace? Cole shut the laptop gently. I'm just trying to protect you, he said. Protect me? I laughed, bitter. Protect who? Her lies or my voice? That evening, I was in our bedroom, city lights beyond the window. I checked emails, then felt it, my rotor blinking strangely. My phone flagged a login from an unknown location. My pulse jumped. I left the bedroom quietly, headed to the hallway. Under the nightstand, a black bug. I froze, heart lodged in my throat. I called Rebecca. She came over. Together we swept the apartment. Another bug behind a picture frame, a tampered router cable. I felt invaded, not just privacy, but my very skin. Rebecca said wiretapping is a felony. I nodded, numb and furious. Late night, I wrapped in a throw blanket, locket in my hand. I whispered, "You want to hear me? Then hear this. I'm not scared anymore." I packed a bag with every physical piece of evidence, journal, contract, even the USB. Because now home wasn't safe anymore. The elevator doors opened into the judge's private chambers with a soft hiss. I stepped in alone. No attorneys, no press, just me and a file folder clutched tightly in my arms. The judge, Beckett, didn't rise when I entered. He glanced up, then motioned me to sit. The room felt like a time capsule. Mahogany shelves stacked with legal encyclopedias, faded portraits of retired justices, and the kind of solemn air only decades of secrets could build. I handed him the evidence in silence, photographs, financial logs, copies of Fallon's edits in her handwriting, and a thumb drive with audio transcripts from my calls with her former accountant. I waited, heartbeat hammering through my ribs. Beckett was calm, deliberate. The kind of man who didn't raise an eyebrow unless someone perjured themselves in front of him. But when he spoke, he didn't ask about emotions. He asked facts. Were there independent witnesses to these contracts? Do you possess the original drafts? I answered every question. Yes, yes, and yes. His fingers steepled in front of his mouth. This isn't just family infighting, Mrs. Whitlow. It's civil fraud, on paper. But be warned, if this goes public, it won't be a clean process. They'll drag your name through glass. I nodded once. They already did. I'm just gathering the shards. 2 days later, the envelope arrived by courier while I was making tea. White, official, thick as a wedding invitation. Court papers. Fallon was being summoned. A hearing. 2 weeks out. Fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. It wasn't just a family mess anymore. It was a legal battle. And they responded exactly how I expected. Her lawyers filed statements questioning my credibility, calling the documents emotionally interpreted and circumstantially misleading. Her PR team fed the media. Headlines exploded. Stepdaughter versus Stepmother, a war over legacy. Bride to billionaire targets grieving widow. They painted me as vindictive, calculated, desperate for attention. My phone lit up with texts. College friends, sorority sisters, even old church friends. Is it true? You okay? Tell me you're not going after your dad's widow. I read every message. Some stung, others warmed me, but all of them reminded me I was no longer invisible. People were watching. That evening, I stood in my apartment by the window, the city below buzzing like it always had. I was on every screen now, and all I could think was, will they remember the facts or just the noise? The following night, I dressed for war. Cole's company was hosting a fundraising gala. I hadn't planned to attend, but when I found out Fallon was the keynote speaker, that changed. The venue was glass and steel, glittering under soft lights. Fallon stood on the stage in a champagne dress, pearls at her throat, spinning the usual script about community trust and shared values. I watched from the back, waited until the claps died. Then I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked onto the stage holding a single folder. She turned, and I saw it. That flicker of recognition, then panic. This is the original contract my father drafted. This, I held up the photo, is his locket, engraved by his mother, never meant for anyone else. And this, I turned to the crowd, is the truth she's spent years trying to bury. Gasps, murmurs. People pulled out phones. Fallon tried to interrupt, but her mic shorted. Mine didn't. This is the last check you'll ever cash in my name. The silence was louder than any applause. She turned to the host, voice strained, trying to spin it, but her words fell flat. Truth had momentum now. Later, on the rooftop, cameras still flashed below. I leaned against the railing, heels off, my body numb. Cole found me there. He didn't speak, just wrapped his arms around me while I shook. I didn't expect to cry, but I did. A friend from the board passed by quietly, squeezed my shoulder. You did what had to be done. Maybe. But it didn't feel like victory. Just something irreversible. The sun dipped below the skyline, leaving the city washed in gray. I stood alone, staring out, holding my phone. New notification. Fallon's attorney filed a temporary restraining order against me. Defamation, they claimed. Public harassment. And now, I was the aggressor. Judge Beckett called not long after. Don't publish anything else. Let the court handle this. I ended the call, staring at the city lights below. I had pulled the curtain. Now Fallon was coming for my name. I pressed send on the press release, my chest heavy, and waited for the next hit. The morning buzzed like a beehive in my phone. Alerts, notifications, texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. I sat on the edge of the bed, sunlight slicing through the blinds, reading headlines that stretched across every screen. Stepdaughter's evidence cracks inheritance case wide open. Podcasts dissected my gala moment frame by frame. Some called me brave, others called me bitter. I wasn't surprised. What shook me was how fast the doubt seeped in. Is the locket even real? Photoshop? Is this a smear campaign against a grieving widow? That one stung. Grieving widow. The only thing Fallon grieved was the loss of control. Cole poured coffee and slid it to me without speaking. He'd been my quiet anchor. I knew he felt the pressure, too. His name was now tethered to mine, for better or worse, but I was done hiding behind careful phrasing and second chances. My father's voice echoed in my memory. If you want them to understand, show them the wound. Not just the scar. I picked up my phone, typed out a statement, not for damage control, for clarity. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was defining myself. There's a difference. Just after lunch, as I reviewed documents for the next legal round, the doorbell rang. Courier. No return address. Inside the envelope, an elegant handwritten letter. I knew that script. Miss Greta Lovelace, my old music teacher and one of my mother's closest friends. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. She told me she'd stayed quiet for too long, that before my mother died, she'd confided in Greta, how she and my father had agreed to leave specific trusts to me, in my name. Greta had even witnessed my father signing the original documents, but over the years, she'd watched Fallon quietly reshape everything. The letter included scans of faded photos, my father's handwriting clear, his signature on pages that were never submitted. In them, I saw dates that matched family birthdays, locations I remembered. It all lined up. At the bottom, Greta wrote, I was paid to stay silent, but I'm old now, and silence is a coward's mask. Tears welled, but not from sadness. It was something deeper. Fury, gratitude, a kind of sacred fire. That evening, Fallon's charity gala glittered in all its usual self-congratulation. She was radiant, flawless as ever, playing the role of gracious benefactor while I walked in through the front doors, not as a guest, but with a press crew behind me. As the crowd drank and laughed under chandeliers, the screens surrounding the ballroom flickered. One by one, slides appeared, the original contracts, journal entries, Greta's letter. Then, the final image, the engraving from my father's locket, each word etched not just in metal, but now in public record. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Fallon's smile cracked. She stepped forward, then hesitated. Her team scrambled to cut the feed, but it was too late. The truth had landed. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just stood there, letting the weight of it settle around us. Beside me, Cole reached for my hand. I didn't take my eyes off Fallon. She turned away first. Reporters cornered me before I reached the exit. Flashbulbs, microphones. Someone asked, "Is this revenge?" I answered simply, "It's justice. One page at a time." Outside, as we slipped into the car, I leaned back. The wind was cool, the sky velvet blue. It should have felt like victory. But backstage, Fallon's tears spilled for the cameras. "I never meant to hurt him," she whispered in rehearsed sorrow. I watched the clip with Cole later that night. She wasn't talking about my father. She meant herself. "This is only the visible part," I said. "The real war's what she's rewriting in the dark." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. I already knew I was right. At midnight, just as I was about to shut my phone off, a video came through. No subject line, just a timestamp. I tapped it open. Grainy footage, black and white, security cam angle. Fallon, in her private office, feeding page after page into a shredder. My breath caught. She had almost erased it all. It had been 3 months. The house in Santa Fe was quiet. Too quiet sometimes, but the kind that heals, not haunts. I walked barefoot through the kitchen, feeling the cool tile under my toes, tea in one hand and a letter in the other. Fallon's last letter, postmarked the week after her arrest. She never apologized. She never would. But she'd tried to justify everything, claimed she was owed what she took, that my mother had left her nothing but expectations, and my father, a man full of regrets. I didn't reply. The FBI investigation was still moving, still combing through bank accounts and false charities, but I'd stepped out of the storm. I didn't need the punishment to feel complete. My days now started at sunrise, volunteering at a women's shelter just a few blocks from here. Most of them had no idea who I was. They didn't care. That was the point. Cole and I never planned a grand ceremony. No press, no designer dress. Just vows, exchanged privately, written by hand. a promise to choose peace over spectacle. The world had already seen enough of me. The quote sat above my desk, painted in my mother's script. Sometimes closure isn't justice, it's knowing when to let go. Last week, Fallon's lawyer handed over what they claimed to be the original will. I met him in a quiet conference room. Dim lights, no cameras, just manila folders and weary eyes. I read it. It was a fake. Poorly done, too. Dates didn't match, language too modern. Even the notary stamp was off. But it had done what Fallon wanted, bought her time, delayed the courts, made headlines. What came after, though, changed me. Her father's old lawyer, a man named Abramson, had passed away weeks earlier. His daughter found something in a locked box, a letter, handwritten, dated 2 months before my father died. He knew. He saw the change in Fallon, the control, the shifts in behavior, the way she positioned herself. "I leave this," he wrote, "not to punish or to praise, but to protect the only one I failed the most. To my daughter, may she never sell her soul for peace." I read that line 3 times. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. And in some warped way, that mattered. Then came a phone call I didn't expect. A request from Fallon. 1 call, supervised, monitored. I said yes. The woman on the other end didn't sound like the one who raised me. Her voice shook, weak. She asked me, "What did you gain, in the end, after everything?" I thought for a second, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted the words to land. "Clarity." She didn't speak. "And I didn't need to destroy you to find it. You did that yourself." There was a pause, then a soft sob, not of remorse, but self-pity. The line cut. I stood there for a while, staring at the receiver. That was it. Not victory, not closure, just done. And that was enough. I started writing again. This time, not for court filings or press statements, but for a memoir. For the women in shelters who told me, in quiet corners, that their families didn't believe them either. I wrote not to explain, but to connect. I spoke at a small library event last weekend. Topic was family estrangement and identity. Only 10 people came. It was perfect. Cole helped with the setup, then sat in the back, quietly proud. Last night, Greta's son visited. He brought a weathered journal wrapped in cloth. Greta's diary. She wrote about my mother, my father, about me. I cried reading it. Not from sadness, from relief. At the shelter, a girl no older than 16 hugged me after a group circle. She whispered, "You don't talk like a victim." And for the first time, I didn't feel like one. This morning, I walked the hills just outside town. The breeze carried a scent I hadn't smelled in decades, lilac, just like my mother's garden. I stopped, closed my eyes, and let it settle around me. No more courtrooms, no more statements, just breath, stillness, truth. 3 months had passed since the night everything broke wide open. Santa Fe's air carried none of the weight I left behind in D.C. The sky here seemed older, wiser, like it had seen storms and outlasted them. I padded barefoot across the cool kitchen tile, the scent of mint tea following me as I walked toward the back patio. In my hand was a letter, the last Fallon ever sent me. She'd scribbled it in pencil, the lines soft and unsteady. I hadn't opened it until this morning. The investigation was still churning, but I had stepped away from the flame. There was nothing more to prove. Her collapse wasn't what would heal me. I'd found something steadier, volunteering at a women's shelter nearby, sitting in silence with women who carried different wounds but familiar silence. Their stories filled the spaces I used to occupy with questions. Now I just listened. I didn't try to fix. I didn't need to. Cole and I hadn't talked about rings or ceremonies. We chose ease, shared meals, shared silence, long walks that didn't require words. Peace came from within, not from pageantry. Sometimes I remembered what Dad once said. Closure is just the moment you stop asking why. I didn't agree back then. I do now. One morning, a knock on the door. No signature, no return address, just an envelope. Fallon's lawyer had finally released the original will, the one he clutched like a poker chip during the courthouse whispers. But it wasn't real. It was a forgery, a well-drafted fake, legal theater designed to buy her time, stall justice, maybe even flip sympathy. I stared at the pages, perfect letterhead, missing meaning. But then came the real turn. Inside a separate envelope from Dad's old legal associate, something he'd hidden away years before. A folded sheet, thin as breath, with his handwriting. He suspected her all along. The lines were short, clipped. I could feel his hesitation. But there, in black ink, he wrote, "I trust character more than blood. If she fights for truth, it's hers." At the bottom, a final line. "To my daughter, may she never sell her soul for peace." I read it 3 times. I didn't know if I felt proud or furious. He left me breadcrumbs instead of a map. Maybe he believed I'd figure it out. Maybe he hoped I'd rise without him. Either way, I had... The call came unexpectedly. Fallon had requested one final conversation. Monitored, timed. I sat in the small visitor room, the phone between my ear and shoulder. Her voice came through thin, like it didn't belong to her body anymore. "I just wanted to ask," she said, pausing like it took effort. "What did you gain, in the end?" I took a breath. "Clarity," I said. "And I didn't have to destroy you to find it. You did that yourself." There was silence. Then the kind of crying that doesn't beg for forgiveness. Just recognition. She wasn't sorry. She was lost. When the line went dead, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. And that was enough. I began writing again, not just journaling, but shaping my story. The story of lies, of inheritance, of stolen years, and reclaimed breath. It wasn't a revenge book. It was a roadmap for women like me. To say, you're not wrong, you're not alone, and you can step away without dragging the rubble behind you. I spoke on small panels, local libraries, quiet spaces where stories mattered more than spectacle. Cole never stood beside me for attention, just to steady me when I needed it. One afternoon, Greta's son visited. He brought a wrapped package, her old diary. I held it like an heirloom. She'd written about guilt, about watching the will vanish, about nights, she almost told me. I sat in my reading chair, thumbing pages with her handwriting pressed into the paper, and cried, not for what I lost, but for what she bore in silence. At the shelter, a young girl, barely 18, hugged me after a talk. "You don't talk like a victim," she whispered. I smiled at her, blinking back the sting. "That's because I'm not one anymore." Spring wrapped the hills in green. On weekends, I hiked past cacti and wind-shaped trees, places where silence didn't ache. One morning, just before dawn, I wandered out as the sun cracked open the horizon. The breeze carried the smell of lilac, my mother's favorite. It used to bloom right outside her kitchen window. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, I let myself just be.